They dismissed her as just another elderly cleaning lady. At 62, she quietly wiped down M1 Abrams tanks, while young technicians struggled with a malfunctioning fire control system they couldn't solve. When the base came under attack and lives hung in the balance, she did something that froze the entire tank depot. What happened next revealed a secret that had been hidden for 30 years. A secret that would change everything they thought they knew about the quiet woman who had been invisible among them. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoyed this story, consider subscribing for more tales of unsung heroes and moments when experience trumps assumption. Eleanor Blackwood pulled her weathered Ford into the civilian parking area of Fort Meridian as the morning sun cast long shadows across the tank depot. At 62, her auburn hair was streaked with silver and pulled into a practical bun, her clothing simple and unremarkable, navy work pants and a faded grey cardigan that had seen too many washes. She gathered her modest lunch bag and walked toward the employee entrance with measured steps. But there was something the young soldiers didn't know about this quiet woman, something that would soon turn their world upside down. 3 months into this job, and she still caught the occasional curious glance. A woman her age working tank maintenance wasn't exactly common, but the pay was steady, and she needed every dollar. Her engineering pension had been devastated by poor financial decisions that weren't even hers, and at 62, finding technical work in an industry obsessed with youth had proven impossible. What none of them realized was that 30 years earlier, in a classified facility outside Detroit, a brilliant young engineer had designed the very systems they struggled with daily. That engineer had been called Dr. Eleanor Blackwood Harrison then. Now she was just Ellie, the cleaning lady. But today, that carefully constructed anonymity was about to shatter. Morning Blackwood called Tank Sergeant Rico Valdez as she passed through security. Unlike some of the younger crew who seemed to view her as either a curiosity or an inconvenience, Valdez had been consistently respectful. "Good morning, Sergeant," she replied, her voice carrying a slight southern accent that betrayed her childhood in rural Alabama before her family moved north when she was 15. The tank bay was already buzzing with morning activity. 4 M1A2 Abrams tanks sat in various stages of maintenance, their 120mm main guns pointed skyward like mechanical prayers. The sight of these 70-ton war machines stirred something deep in Eleanor's memory, a complex mixture of pride and bitter loss. She had helped design the fire control system for these exact tanks 30 years ago, fresh out of Georgia Tech with dual degrees in mechanical and electrical engineering. Back then, she'd been Dr. Eleanor Blackwood Harrison, lead systems engineer for Titan Defense Solutions. Her innovations had made these tanks among the most accurate fighting vehicles ever built. Now she was just Ellie, the cleaning lady who knew which chemicals wouldn't damage the sensitive electronic components. But if you looked closely, and no one ever did, you might notice how her eyes lingered on certain components, how her hands moved with unusual familiarity around systems that should have been foreign to her, how she sometimes caught herself reaching for diagnostic ports before remembering her role. The signs were there. No one was paying attention. Blackwood! Maintenance Chief Danny Rodriguez's voice cut across the bay. "You're on Tank 3 today. Full detail. Colonel Morrison's doing inspection rounds this afternoon." Tank 3. Eleanor nodded and gathered her cleaning supplies. As she approached the massive vehicle, her engineer's eye automatically assessed its condition. Everything looked proper from the outside, but something nagged at her, a subtle asymmetry in the thermal sight housing that shouldn't be there. Around her, the maintenance crew worked with the casual efficiency of experienced professionals. Specialist Tommy Fletcher, barely 22, was running diagnostics on Tank 1's engine systems. Staff Sergeant Patricia Kim supervised the replacement of road wheels on Tank 4. The familiar sounds of pneumatic tools and diesel engines filled the air with industrial harmony. Eleanor began her cleaning routine, starting with the hull's reactive armor panels. As she worked, she overheard a conversation that made her pause. A conversation that would force her to make a choice she'd been avoiding for 3 months. "Fire control system's been acting up all week," complained Corporal Jake Morrison, emerging from Tank 3's turret with grease-stained hands and frustration written across his young face. "Did you run the full diagnostic sequence?" asked Sergeant Valdez, approaching with a tactical tablet in hand. "3 times. System passes every individual test, but when we try to engage targets, the ballistic computer won't sync with the thermal imaging. It's like the components are speaking different languages." Eleanor's cloth stilled on the fender she was cleaning. Her pulse quickened. A sync failure between the ballistic computer and thermal imaging meant the tank couldn't accurately engage targets, a potentially fatal flaw in combat situations. She'd encountered this exact problem during development testing in 1994. But here's what the young technicians didn't know. She wasn't just familiar with this problem. She had created the solution. 30 years ago, in a classified testing facility, she had written the very diagnostic protocols they were failing to implement correctly. The irony was almost unbearable. "Maybe we should call in civilian tech support," suggested Morrison, wiping his hands on a rag with obvious frustration. "Civilian techs are backed up for 2 weeks, Valdez replied, his voice carrying the weight of command responsibility. "And Colonel Morrison wants all tanks mission-ready by Friday for the War Games exercise." Chief Rodriguez joined the group, his expression grim with the kind of concern that came from 20 years of military service. "Corporate's sending someone next week, but that doesn't help us now. We might have to red tag the tank." Red tagging meant removing Tank 3 from service, a significant blow to their readiness numbers and a professional black mark on Rodriguez's otherwise spotless record. Eleanor continued cleaning, but every fibre of her engineering background screamed that she could fix this problem in 20 minutes if she could just access the system. The conversation continued around her, technical specifications and diagnostic procedures that she knew better than the people discussing them. And then something happened that changed everything. But before we get to that moment, you need to understand what had brought Eleanor to this point. Why a woman who had once been one of the most respected engineers in military technology was now scrubbing tank hulls for minimum wage. The year was 1994. Dr. Eleanor Blackwood Harrison stood in a secure testing facility outside Detroit, watching the first live-fire test of her integrated fire control system. She was 32 years old, brilliant, and at the pinnacle of her career. The M1A2 Abrams before her represented 3 years of her life. Every algorithm, every interface protocol, every failsafe had been designed by her team under her leadership. The test was flawless. Her system had achieved 97% accuracy at ranges that previous generations of tanks could only dream of. Defense Department officials had called it revolutionary. Her colleagues had called her a genius. She had no way of knowing that within a decade, ageism and corporate politics would systematically erase her from the industry she had helped create. That brilliant young engineers would become invisible old women. That innovation would be credited to younger men, while she struggled to find work washing the very machines she had designed. But that morning, in 1994, watching her creation perform flawlessly, she had felt invincible. Now, 30 years later, she was about to discover that some things can't be erased. Some knowledge runs too deep. Some expertise transcends age and circumstance. Let's return to Fort Meridian, where Eleanor's carefully maintained anonymity was about to explode. "What specific error codes are you getting?" she asked quietly, not looking up from her methodical cleaning. The men turned to her with expressions ranging from surprise to mild condescension. "Error codes?" Morrison laughed, not unkindly. "Blackwood, no offense, but this isn't exactly cleaning-related stuff." "I understand," Eleanor replied evenly, her voice maintaining the same respectful tone she'd cultivated over 3 months. "But I've overheard you discussing this problem for 3 days now. Sometimes fresh perspective helps, even from unexpected sources." Chief Rodriguez's expressions softened slightly. Eleanor had proven herself one of his more reliable workers. Punctual, thorough, and she never complained about the heavy lifting required to clean around 70-ton war machines. More importantly, she seemed to genuinely care about the equipment. "Error 0x4F7A and 0x2B15, he said after a moment's consideration. "Those numbers mean anything to you?" Eleanor's heart raced. Those were specific diagnostic codes she had personally written into the system 3 decades ago during the development phase. 0x4F7A indicated a timing synchronization failure between the thermal imaging processor and the ballistic computer. 0x2B15 meant the problem was likely in the data bus architecture, probably a corrupted initialization sequence in the targeting protocol. Those codes, she began carefully, then caught herself. How could she explain her recognition without revealing her true background? They sound like communication errors between different system components. Sergeant Valdez raised an eyebrow, his interest genuinely piqued. That's actually pretty insightful for someone with a cleaning background. Where did you pick up technical knowledge? Before Eleanor could formulate a safe response, alarms began blaring throughout the depot. The base-wide communication system crackled to life with an urgency that made everyone freeze. All personnel, this is command. We have confirmed reports of hostile forces conducting aggressive reconnaissance 15 kilometers from our position. Intelligence suggests potential probe attack imminent. All tank crews to stations immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. But here's what made this moment different from every other emergency drill Eleanor had witnessed in 3 months. Tank 3, the vehicle with the malfunctioning fire control system, was about to be sent into potential combat with a broken primary weapon. The bay erupted into controlled chaos. Tank crews sprinted to their vehicles while maintenance personnel scrambled to clear equipment and secure their work areas. The familiar peacetime rhythm of the depot transformed into the urgent ballet of combat preparation. And Eleanor faced a choice that had been building for 3 months. Continue hiding, let these young soldiers face danger with equipment she could repair in minutes, or reveal herself and risk everything she'd worked to protect. Damn it, Chief Rodriguez cursed as Tank 3's crew climbed aboard their vehicle. That fire control system is still down. We're sending them out with a broken gun. Tank Commander Lieutenant Sarah Bennett emerged from the commander's hatch, her face tight with concern. A 26-year-old officer who had trained for 2 years with her crew, now facing her first potential combat situation with faulty equipment. Chief, what's the status on our targeting system? Still malfunctioning, ma'am. We can't get the ballistic computer to sync with thermal imaging. Eleanor watched this exchange with growing anxiety. These young soldiers were about to face real danger with equipment she knew she could repair. The moral weight of her silence pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. In that moment, 30 years of hiding collided with a lifetime of professional responsibility. What happened next would change everything. "Ma'am," she said quietly, approaching Lieutenant Bennett, "I might be able to help with the fire control system." The lieutenant looked down at her with obvious confusion. "You're the cleaning contractor, right?" "Yes, ma'am, but I have some technical background. If you could give me access to the diagnostic interface, I might be able to identify the problem." Chief Rodriguez stepped forward, torn between desperation and protocol. "Blackwood, I appreciate the offer, but this is complex military hardware. We're talking about multi-million-dollar systems here. What harm could there be in letting me look?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "The system is already non-functional. I can't make it worse." Lieutenant Bennett exchanged glances with her crew. Gunner Sergeant Mike Torres leaned out of his hatch. "Ma'am, we've got maybe 10 minutes before we have to roll out. If there's any chance..." The lieutenant made a command decision. "Do it, but you touch nothing without explicit permission." Eleanor climbed onto Tank 3's hull with surprising agility for someone her age. As she approached the commander's station, her hands moved with practiced familiarity across surfaces that looked alien to the watching soldiers but felt like home to her. And here's where the story takes a turn that no one, not even Eleanor, expected. "I need access to the diagnostic terminal," she said, her voice taking on a subtle authority that made everyone pause. Lieutenant Bennett activated the system, and immediately Eleanor was transported back 30 years. The interface had been updated and modernized, but the underlying architecture was unmistakably her work. Her fingers moved across the touchscreen with growing confidence as diagnostic data flowed across the display. But what she saw on those screens stopped her cold. This wasn't just a random malfunction. Someone had deliberately altered the initialization protocols. The timing errors weren't accidental, they were sabotage, subtle enough to appear as equipment failure, but precise enough to disable the tank's primary weapon at a critical moment. Eleanor's blood ran cold. This wasn't about fixing a broken system. This was about preventing a catastrophic security breach that could cost lives. "There," she said, her voice carefully controlled while her mind raced through implications. "Your problem is in the initialization sequence for the thermal ballistic interface. But there's something else you need to know." She paused, knowing that her next words would cross a line she could never uncross. "This wasn't an accident. Someone has been systematically sabotaging your fire control systems." Sergeant Torres stared at her in amazement. "How did you identify that so quickly? Our best technicians have been working on this for days." Eleanor's hands were already moving through repair sequences, her muscle memory guiding her through procedures she had designed decades earlier. As she worked, her movements became more assured, more professional. The unassuming cleaning lady seemed to transform before their eyes into someone entirely different. As Eleanor worked to neutralize the sabotage, accessing systems with clearance codes that shouldn't have existed anymore, she revealed the final piece of the puzzle. "Chief Rodriguez," she said, her voice carrying new urgency, "I need you to check the maintenance logs for the past 6 weeks. Look for anyone who has had unsupervised access to the fire control systems during off hours." "Ma'am, with respect, you're a cleaning contractor. You don't have authority to—" Eleanor's hands were already moving through repair sequences, her muscle memory guiding her through procedures she had designed decades earlier. As she worked, her movements became more assured, more professional. The unassuming cleaning lady seemed to transform before their eyes into someone entirely different. "My name," she said quietly while executing a bypass sequence that none of them had ever seen before, "is Dr. Eleanor Blackwood Harrison. I am the lead designer of the M102 Abrams Integrated Fire Control System. Every algorithm you're looking at, every diagnostic protocol you've been running, every error code in that database, I wrote them." The silence that followed was profound. Every eye in the immediate area fixed on her, with expressions ranging from disbelief to dawning recognition. But Eleanor wasn't finished. The revelation about sabotage had triggered something deeper, a memory from 1998 that she'd tried to forget. Chief Rodriguez's mouth opened and closed without sound. The implications of what she was saying slowly sank in across the group of soldiers who had been treating her as an elderly cleaning lady for 3 months. "And 6 years ago," Eleanor continued, her fingers flying across interfaces with devastating precision, "I discovered that someone was stealing my designs and selling them to foreign buyers. I reported it through official channels. 3 weeks later, I was terminated for performance issues and blacklisted from the industry." The pieces of a much larger puzzle were beginning to fall into place. "The person who fired me," Eleanor said, initiating a deep-level diagnostic that revealed hidden modifications to the core programming, was Charles Hartwell, then Director of Advanced Systems at Titan Defense Solutions. Lieutenant Bennett leaned forward. "Hartwell? Isn't he now?" "Chief Technology Consultant for Fort Meridian," Eleanor finished grimly. "And according to these logs, he's been here for the past month, conducting security upgrades to your fire control systems." The magnitude of what she was revealing hit them like a physical blow. This wasn't just about a broken tank. This was about systematic sabotage by someone with the highest level of access and authority. But Eleanor's most shocking revelation was still to come. "Hartwell didn't just steal my designs 6 years ago," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "He's been systematically compromising military systems across multiple bases. The security upgrades he's been installing are actually back doors that would allow remote disabling of our primary weapons during combat." She pulled up a hidden directory that made Lieutenant Bennett gasp. "This shows unauthorized access to fire control systems at Fort Knox, Fort Campbell, and Fort Stewart. Hartwell has been building a network of compromised weapons systems for months." Chief Rodriguez found his voice. "Why didn't you report this when you discovered it?" Eleanor's laugh was bitter. "Report it to whom?" "Hartwell has connections throughout the Pentagon. I'm a discredited 62-year-old woman working as a cleaning contractor. Who would believe me? She paused in her work, looking directly at Lieutenant Bennett. So I took this job. For 3 months, I've been gathering evidence, documenting the sabotage, waiting for the right moment to act. Today, when lives were at stake, that moment came. The diagnostic display suddenly showed green status lights across all fire control systems, but Eleanor wasn't finished. Lieutenant, when you return from this mission, you're going to find that Hartwell has disappeared. The evidence I've gathered will be transmitted to military intelligence, the FBI, and the Pentagon simultaneously. But first, I need to ensure he can't activate any of his back doors remotely. Her fingers moved through one final sequence. A master override that had built into the original system 30 years ago as a failsafe, never imagining she would need to use it under these circumstances. There, she said, stepping back from the console. Your tank is not only repaired, it's completely secured against remote interference. Hartwell's back doors have been permanently disabled. But the story was far from over. As Tank 3 prepared to deploy, Eleanor made one final revelation that would change everything they thought they knew about the quiet woman who had been cleaning their equipment for 3 months. As the tank's engine roared to life, Lieutenant Bennett leaned down from her commander's hatch. Dr. Blackwood Harrison, thank you. You may have just saved our lives. Eleanor stepped back as the massive war machine began to move, watching her technological offspring head toward potential combat. The irony wasn't lost on her. The weapons system she had created to protect soldiers was now protecting soldiers who had unknowingly benefited from her daily care and attention. 2 hours later, the tanks returned from their mission. The hostile forces had withdrawn upon detecting the rapid response, but Tank 3's crew reported that their fire control system had functioned flawlessly throughout the operation. But that wasn't the end of the story. It was actually just the beginning. Lieutenant Bennett sought out Eleanor immediately upon return, her expression a mixture of awe and confusion. Dr. Blackwood Harrison, I've spoken with Colonel Morrison. He wants to meet with you immediately about a consulting position. Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. I expected as much. There's something else, the lieutenant continued. The diagnostic logs from our mission show that your repairs didn't just fix the immediate problem. You optimized the entire targeting sequence. Our accuracy improved by 12% over baseline. A small smile crossed Eleanor's face, the first truly satisfied expression her co-workers had seen from her. Old habits die hard, Lieutenant. When I repair something, I improve it. But what happened next would shock even Eleanor. As she walked toward the command building for her meeting with Colonel Morrison, her secure phone, a device none of her co-workers knew she possessed, buzzed with an encrypted message. The message was from FBI counterintelligence. They had been monitoring Hartwell for months, waiting for him to make a move that would reveal the full extent of his network. Eleanor's evidence hadn't just exposed one rogue contractor. It had uncovered a massive espionage operation that threatened national security. Within hours, Hartwell was in custody along with 6 accomplices across 4 military installations. The back doors he had installed in weapons systems were neutralized before they could be activated. A plot to cripple American armor capabilities during a potential conflict had been stopped by a 62-year-old woman whom everyone had dismissed as invisible. But Eleanor's story had one more twist that no one saw coming. 6 months later, Dr. Eleanor Blackwood Harrison stood before a congressional subcommittee on defense technology, but not as the witness they expected. Dr. Blackwood Harrison, said the committee chairman, your work over the past 6 months has revolutionized tank warfare systems across all branches of the military. But there's something about your background that doesn't appear in any of our files. Eleanor's eyes met those of the chairman with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent 3 months being underestimated and 6 months proving everyone wrong. That's because for the past 3 years, I haven't been Dr. Eleanor Blackwood Harrison, defense contractor. She replied calmly. I've been Agent Eleanor Blackwood, Defense Intelligence Agency. The silence in the congressional hearing room was absolute. 3 years ago, DIA recruited me to investigate suspected technology theft and sabotage within defense contractors. My firing from Titan Defense Solutions was carefully orchestrated cover for deep assignment. The cleaning job at Fort Meridian was my final assignment, to gather evidence on Hartwell's network from the inside. She paused, allowing the implications to sink in. For 3 years, I have been systematically documenting the theft of American military technology and the installation of backdoors in critical defense systems. The evidence I gathered has led to the arrest of 23 individuals across 12 installations and prevented what could have been the most devastating intelligence breach in military history. The transformation was complete. The invisible cleaning lady had revealed herself to be not just a brilliant engineer, but a deep-cover intelligence operative whose mission had been to save American military capabilities from systematic sabotage. Chief Rodriguez, who had been invited to testify about the investigation, shook his head in amazement. 3 months. She was right there for 3 months, and we never suspected. That, said the committee chairman, was exactly the point. But there was still one final question that needed to be answered. Dr. Blackwood Harrison, asked a committee member, what made you volunteer for such a dangerous and thankless assignment? You could have remained safely retired with your reputation intact. Eleanor's answer revealed the heart of everything that had happened. Because, Congressman, some things matter more than personal comfort. These young soldiers, Lieutenant Bennett, Sergeant Valdez, Corporal Morrison, they depend on equipment that works when their lives are on the line. Someone had to ensure that trust wasn't betrayed. She gestured toward Chief Rodriguez. These people do their jobs with dedication and skill every day. They deserve to know that the systems they maintained, the equipment they trusted, hadn't been compromised by greed and treason. Her voice carried the weight of 3 years of sacrifice and 30 years of expertise. I designed those systems to protect American soldiers. I wasn't about to let anyone pervert them into instruments of betrayal. The hearing concluded with Dr. Eleanor Blackwood Harrison receiving the intelligence community's highest civilian honor. But more importantly, new protocols were established to prevent the kind of systematic sabotage that had nearly succeeded. As she left the Capitol building, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had taken her from invisible cleaning lady to celebrated hero. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had achieved her greatest victory not by demanding recognition, but by accepting invisibility until the moment it mattered most. Sometimes the most important battles are fought by people no one notices, in places no one thinks to look, by individuals willing to sacrifice recognition for results. Dr. Eleanor Blackwood Harrison had proven that wisdom, experience, and dedication recognize no age limits, and that sometimes the most powerful weapons against betrayal are held by those humble enough to push a mop until duty called them to push back against injustice. The 62-year-old tank cleaner had not only fixed a fire control system with her eyes closed, she had saved American military technology from systematic destruction, one invisible day at a time.